Is that a test that's kind of designed to be done once or many times periodically?
I think the most important one is to do it at least once. It's not meant to be done several times per year, but perhaps once a year. And so basically what is being assessed is the tendency towards over-engagement, which is a really strong predictor of burnout. People that are all laid back don't really become burnt out. But, you know, when you look at lawyers, that whole tendency towards perfectionism, which you have initially when you sign up for law school, and that trait is then being rewarded in your legal work, especially the critical part. Being able to spot problems and potential problems tomorrow and always seek out the weaknesses and everything, and then not being able to turn it off. You continue when you come home, and you become a lot more critical than you are perhaps aware of, because that's also a problem for many lawyers, that that identity of being a lawyer, I am a lawyer, I don't work as a lawyer, makes you really susceptible for problems and setbacks at work, because you bring it home, because that's who you are. You don't have several identities to shift between, which a lot of other professions do have, because it's just a job. It's not your whole life. You know, you want to get home from work. And so in one way, it's a privilege to have that profession and that engagement and that challenge that lawyering is providing you. But it's also eroding the boundaries between work and leisure, between your personal identity and then your professional identity.
You hit on quite a good point around identity there. I think came up previously that if you're spending kind of your day and sometimes beyond your day until the early hours of the next morning, and what you're doing is you're thinking about worst case scenario and building that into contracts to mitigate the risk, or you're dealing with worst case scenario when it actually happens and people come to you because they need your services to represent them, and you're repeating that throughout your day, all day, every day. It's repetition creates habit, and if you're repeating that, it's probably quite easy to take that home. And I think that's why there are a lot of problems with lawyers between their families and friends and connections outside of work. It's because you're kind of wiring your brain to think differently, and that kind of awareness that you are not a lawyer, it's just a character you play during your day almost. It's like an actor going into a studio and playing out the role of someone. It's not actually who you are, it's just something that you do. I think that separation and that awareness to keep it separate is quite an important one.
I think that's a really good point, Nick. And I think it's so difficult a lot of the time for lawyers, because, I mean, when it takes over such a huge part of your life, unless you've got a huge amount of sort of mental and psychological awareness, I mean, in the first place, you don't necessarily realize that you are not your thoughts, that there are different parts of you, that you're more complicated than just this sort of, I don't know, maybe one being, and you're completely attached to all of that, you know. But also, if you're working 100-hour weeks, you haven't got the time or the space to think about anything. You're just thinking, how do I get through this day? How do I get to midday? How do I get to 3 o'clock, 6 o'clock, midnight? I've been there, you know. And I think we sort of have to bear in mind the backdrop of all of that. And I mean, what I always say to people I'm coaching or people I'm working with is, before you can get to the point where you can even really sort of work out how you can be happier and healthier and have the job you want and the life you want, you've actually first of all just got to take that breather. Because when you're in, I suppose it brings us back to our burnout point, doesn't it? When you're completely exhausted, sort of reflecting on your identity isn't your priority, but you're just so glued to it. Well, that's certainly my personal experience and what I see in other people quite often.